Secret conspiracies that actually happened. 1. The invisible hand of sabotage, how Operation Merlin unfolded in the shadows. In the shadowy corridors of international politics, beneath the polished surface of public diplomacy, there exists a different realm. One where whispers hold more power than speeches, and a single document can tilt the balance of global security. This is the domain of covert operations, where nations maneuver in the dark to protect their interests, often in ways the public will never know. It was in this realm, in the late 1990s, that the United States faced a chilling possibility: that Iran, long a geopolitical rival, might soon develop the ultimate bargaining chip, a nuclear weapon. The mere potential of this scenario was enough to set powerful wheels in motion. You see, ever since the US-backed coup in 1953 that toppled Iran's elected government, relations between the two nations had been stained with deep mistrust and resentment. In the decades that followed, waves of sanctions, diplomatic standoffs, and mutual accusations of terrorism kept tensions simmering beneath a fragile surface. And though by the 1990s the world was breathing a little easier after the Cold War, the specter of nuclear proliferation loomed large. The US and Russia had signed treaties to reduce their nuclear arsenals, but that fragile peace could be shattered if other nations, particularly those deemed hostile, joined the nuclear club. In intelligence circles, quiet murmurs began to circulate, hints that Iran was pursuing nuclear capabilities not merely for energy, but with military intent. There was no hard proof, only a gnawing fear. And in matters of national security, fear alone can be a potent catalyst. The solution that emerged from within the CIA's clandestine corridors was bold, risky, and drenched in subterfuge: Operation Merlin. Its aim was deceptively simple: feed Iran flawed blueprints for a critical nuclear weapon component, causing their scientists to waste precious years pursuing dead-end designs. On paper, it was an elegant act of sabotage. In practice, it became a cautionary tale of how even the most sophisticated plots can spiral beyond control. The chosen method hinged on exploiting the instability of post-Soviet Russia. After the USSR's collapse, many Russian nuclear scientists found themselves unemployed and desperate. Among them, the CIA identified a recently defected Russian specialist whose expertise and connections could serve as the perfect delivery mechanism for the doctored designs. His mission: pose as an independent agent, approach Iranian intermediaries, and offer them what appeared to be stolen blueprints for a high-voltage neutron initiator, a device crucial to detonating a nuclear weapon. The catch? The blueprints were intentionally corrupted with subtle but critical flaws that would render any resulting weapon non-functional. The brilliance of the plan lay in its deniability. Should the scheme be exposed, the US could plausibly deny any involvement. Yet beneath this cloak of plausible deniability lurked an unexpected vulnerability, one born not of malice, but of human nature. You see, the Russian scientist was kept largely in the dark about the true scope of the operation. While he knew he was passing sensitive information, he was unaware that the blueprints were deliberately sabotaged. When he reviewed the documents himself, his well-trained eyes immediately spotted the inconsistencies. Acting in what he believed was good faith, perhaps out of professional pride or a misguided sense of responsibility, he corrected the errors, unknowingly restoring the blueprints to a functional state. And so, with an innocent act of diligence, the heart of Operation Merlin was undone. Instead of misleading Iranian scientists, the corrected designs may have inadvertently advanced their research. The CIA's carefully laid trap had, in the end, backfired spectacularly. The full scope of this blunder remained hidden from the public until 2003, when former CIA officer Jeffrey Sterling revealed details of Operation Merlin to a New York Times journalist. For his whistleblowing, Sterling was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, a stark reminder of the risks faced by those who choose to expose the shadow games played by their own governments. As of today, there is no confirmed evidence that Iran possesses nuclear weapons, though their nuclear ambitions remain a subject of intense international scrutiny. Operation Merlin stands as a haunting example of how even the most meticulously crafted covert operations can unravel, often through the simplest of human actions. It is a tale of unintended consequences, of the thin line between control and chaos in the hidden theater of international espionage. And it serves as a chilling reminder that in this world of shadows, even the best-laid plans are never truly immune to fate's invisible hand. Whispers in the airwaves, the hidden machinery behind Operation Mockingbird. It begins not with gunfire or the clash of armies, but with words. Words carefully chosen, artfully placed, repeated, until they become truth in the minds of millions. In the theater of modern power, where bombs and bullets have their place but persuasion is the ultimate weapon, controlling the narrative means controlling reality itself. And nowhere was this principle more chillingly embodied than in Operation Mockingbird, a covert campaign that unfolded not in the shadows of war zones, but in the trusted voices of news anchors, the headlines of morning papers, the scripts of beloved films. To understand how such a program came to be, one must step back into the turbulent aftermath of World War II, a time when the world stood poised between hope and fear. The Allies had emerged victorious, but the alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union was already fracturing. The Iron Curtain had begun to descend across Europe, ideologies hardening into opposing camps. On one side, Western democracies espousing capitalism and individual freedom. On the other, the Soviet bloc, promoting communism and state control. The Cold War had begun, not with a declaration, but with an invisible war for hearts and minds. For the United States, the threat was not merely external. There was a growing fear that communist ideology could seep into American society itself, eroding trust in capitalism, in democracy, in the American way of life. But how to combat an idea? How to inoculate a population against unseen whispers of dissent? The answer lay not in censorship alone, but in shaping what the public consumed, subtly, pervasively, through the very institutions they trusted most. Thus was born Operation Mockingbird. The CIA, newly formed under President Harry Truman with a mission to safeguard national security, understood that influence was as critical as intelligence. Under the guise of protecting American interests, they embarked on a campaign to mold public opinion from within. Direct propaganda would be too obvious, too crude. The genius of Mockingbird was its subtlety. The goal was to make the message seem organic, to flow naturally from multiple respected sources. If the same pro-American, anti-communist themes appeared in newspapers, on radio, in movies, on television, it would create a powerful illusion of consensus. And in the 1950s, when access to information was limited, when Americans largely trusted what they read and heard, this approach was devastatingly effective. Through a vast and secret network, the CIA infiltrated the nation's media landscape. Hundreds of journalists, editors, and publishers were brought into the fold, some willingly, others through subtle pressure or financial incentive. Major news outlets, prestigious magazines, popular films all became conduits for the carefully crafted narrative. Articles warned of the dangers of communist subversion. Films painted communists as villains bent on destroying freedom. Radio broadcasts extolled the virtues of capitalism and the American dream. It was a symphony of influence, conducted from behind closed doors. Fear became the instrument of control. Stories of communist spies lurking among neighbors, of traitors in high places, fanned the flames of paranoia. The infamous Red Scare gripped the nation, pitting citizens against each other in a climate of suspicion and hysteria. Even a casual remark or an innocent association could lead to accusations of disloyalty. And all the while, behind the scenes, Operation Mockingbird pulled the strings. For 2 decades, from the 1950s through the 1970s, this manipulation of public perception continued largely unchecked, but cracks began to appear. The disillusionment of the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, these events shook the American people's faith in their government and their media. In 1975, the U.S. Senate formed the Church Committee to investigate intelligence abuses. What they uncovered was staggering. Programs like MK Ultra, covert attempts to overthrow foreign governments, assassination plots, and the vast reach of Operation Mockingbird. The revelations were explosive, forcing the CIA to publicly disavow the program. Yet the question remains, did it truly end? In an age of digital media, where algorithms shape what we see, where disinformation spreads like wildfire, the echoes of Mockingbird are unmistakable. Today, we are bombarded with more information than any human mind can fully process. Every article, every post, every headline is a potential seed of influence. And so we must ask ourselves, whose narrative are we consuming? Whose agenda are we unknowingly serving? The tools may have evolved, but the game remains the same. Operation Mockingbird serves as a stark reminder that the battle for the mind is never over, and that the most powerful form of control is the one you never even realize is there. 3. Blueprints for manufactured outrage. The sinister vision of Operation Northwoods. Imagine, if you will, a world where the stories you hear, the breaking headlines, the tragic events that stir the nation, the collective moments of shock and grief, are not what they seem. Imagine a government so determined to achieve its aims that it would be willing to orchestrate terror, to sacrifice innocence, to burn the truth to the ground and rebuild it in its own image. This is not fiction. It is the chilling reality that nearly came to pass under a plan known as Operation Northwoods. The story begins in the late 1950s, a time when the geopolitical chessboard was shifting rapidly and the Cold War's icy grip was tightening. Just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, a storm was brewing. The Cuban Revolution, led by the defiant Fidel Castro, had overthrown the US-backed Batista regime, a government riddled with corruption, inequality, and the interests of American business empires. In its place rose a new order, communist in ideology, aligned with the Soviet Union. For Washington, the sight of a Marxist government so close to American shores was intolerable. Cuba was no distant Eastern European satellite. It was a glaring red beacon in the Western Hemisphere. Castro's nationalization of American-owned assets, sugar plantations, oil refineries, coffee enterprises, only deepened the wound. The Eisenhower administration responded with economic sanctions, but when John F. Kennedy assumed the presidency in 1961, more aggressive action, was already on the table. The infamous Bay of Pigs invasion, a covert attempt to topple Castro using a CIA-trained force of Cuban exiles, ended in humiliating defeat. Outnumbered and outgunned, the invaders were swiftly crushed, leaving U.S. leadership scrambling for an alternative. A direct military invasion risked catastrophic escalation. The Soviet Union had made clear its allegiance to Cuba, and any overt act of aggression could trigger a global conflict. The solution? Covert subversion. The strategy would shift to influencing perception of both the American public and the international community until intervention seemed not only justified, but necessary. Enter Operation Northwoods. Conceived by top U.S. military planners and presented to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara in 1962, it was a false flag operation of staggering ambition. Its core premise: to fabricate acts of terror and blame them on Cuba, igniting public outrage and creating the political will for military action. The declassified documents reveal a plan that reads like a dystopian screenplay. The proposals included sinking U.S. ships and staging mock funerals to stir grief and anger, bombing civilian areas in Miami and other cities, targeting Cuban refugees, sabotaging crops in neighboring nations, even orchestrating attacks on American aircraft. The most disturbing element was the plan to fake the downing of a civilian airliner. The blueprint was meticulously detailed. A commercial plane would be duplicated with an identical aircraft. The duplicate would carry carefully selected passengers, boarded under false identities. This plane would land secretly, its passengers evacuated safely. Meanwhile, the original aircraft, now an unmanned drone, would continue its path into Cuban airspace. There, false radio transmissions would simulate a Cuban attack, followed by the plane's remote-controlled destruction. The intended result? A wave of grief-stricken headlines. A grieving nation clamoring for justice. A green light for war. The brilliance of the plan, if one dares use such a word, lay in its psychological potency. In an age before digital skepticism, when Americans largely trusted the narratives presented by their government and media, such an event could have unified the public in fervent support of military retaliation. Yet fate intervened in the form of the Cuban Missile Crisis. As it turned out, while the U.S. was plotting to frame Cuba, the Soviet Union had secretly installed nuclear missiles on the island. The world teetered on the brink of annihilation. For 13 harrowing days, humanity faced the very real prospect of global nuclear war. In the end, diplomacy prevailed. The Soviets agreed to remove their missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. promise to dismantle its own missiles in Turkey and cease overt military aggression against Cuba. Operation Northwoods was shelved, officially terminated, though its dark shadow lingers in history. The documents were declassified decades later, a stark testament to how close the United States came to manufacturing terror on its own soil for political ends. It remains a sobering reminder. When the stakes are high enough, even the most unthinkable acts can be placed on the table by those in power. And though Operation Northwoods was never executed, the very fact that it was conceived, approved by top military officials, and presented for implementation speaks volumes about the unseen machinery that shapes the course of nations. The next time the news shocks you, the next time tragedy strikes and the winds of war begin to stir, ask yourself, whose script are we following? Void. Harvesting the shadows of war, the untold secrets of Operation Paperclip. beneath the celebratory banners of victory in 1945, as the ashes of World War II still smoldered across Europe, a far more secretive battle was already underway, one not fought with guns or tanks, but with minds. Minds capable of reshaping the very future of human civilization. In this silent race for intellectual supremacy, Operation Paperclip emerged as one of the most ethically unsettling gambits in modern history. It is a story of brilliance entwined with darkness, where genius was bartered for justice and atrocities were buried beneath the shining veneer of scientific progress. To understand its genesis, you must first see the landscape of that fragile post-war world. The Third Reich had collapsed, but the war of ideologies had only just begun. The Soviet Union, America's uneasy wartime ally, was now poised as its greatest rival. And with Germany's defeat came a terrifying realization. The Nazis had amassed a trove of technological breakthroughs, advanced rocketry, aviation marvels, chemical weapons research that could tip the scales of global power. If the Soviets seized this knowledge, the balance would be lost. Thus, what began as a matter of national security quickly spiraled into a moral quagmire. While the world's gaze was fixed on Nuremberg, where Nazi war criminals were being brought to justice, another operation was quietly being set into motion. In July 1945, mere weeks after Hitler's demise, Operation Overcast, soon to be renamed Operation Paperclip, was born. Its mission: to extract the most valuable German scientists and their research, and to bring them safely into the American fold. The rationale was pragmatic, even ruthless. If these men could help the United States outpace the Soviets, their pasts, however stained, would be conveniently obscured. Over 1,600 scientists, engineers, and technicians would ultimately be swept up by Paperclip. They were not minor figures. Among them were the architects of the V-2 rocket program, pioneers of aviation medicine and chemical warfare experts. Men like Werner von Braun, who had overseen the construction of the V-2 rockets using forced labor from concentration camps, yet would go on to become a director at NASA and a celebrated figure in the American space race. Or Hubertus Strughold, implicated in human experimentation, later hailed as the father of space medicine. The list goes on, each name a chilling intersection of genius and guilt. Publicly, of course, the American people knew none of this. The government meticulously sanitized the pasts of these recruits, crafting new identities and public narratives. War crimes were erased, affiliations forgotten. In the name of technological progress, the victors of the war became complicit in rewriting its legacy. The results were undeniable. Fueled by the talents of these former enemies, American advancements in rocketry, aerospace, and military technology surged ahead. The space race against the Soviet Union reached new heights, culminating in the Apollo missions that carried humanity to the moon. Yet beneath these triumphs, a moral debt remained unpaid. In time, investigative journalists and historians would begin to unearth the buried truths of Paperclip. Connections to atrocities resurfaced. The glossy portraits of these scientists were marred by their past complicity in the machinery of the Third Reich. Some fled, seeking refuge abroad. The full scope of Operation Paperclip remained officially classified until 1998, when the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, signed by President Clinton, forced the release of long-hidden documents. Today, the story of Paperclip stands as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how easily ethical lines can blur when power and fear drive the decisions of nations. And if this is what we know now, one can only imagine the shadows that still lie undisclosed. If this glimpse into the hidden corridors of history has intrigued you, there is much more to uncover. Follow this channel for deeper dives into the conspiracies and covert operations that have shaped our world. Like this video, share it with curious minds, and subscribe to stay connected as we peel back the layers of the past that were never meant to see the light of day. The truth is out there. Let's uncover it together.